My toddler is drowning, please save her. Maid begs Mafia Boss at beach Isla Blanca Park. The morning arrived at Isla Blanca Park the way all beautiful things do, quietly, without announcing itself, without asking permission from the broken hearts that lived beneath its golden light. The Gulf of Mexico stretched wide and endless under a sky so blue it looked painted by someone who had never known grief. Families had already begun spreading their colorful towels across the pale sand. Children laughed and chased each other near the shoreline. Seagulls called out from above like little white messengers of freedom. The salty breeze carried the smell of sunscreen and roasted corn and something sweet from a vendor cart near the parking area. It was the kind of morning that made people believe, even if only for a few hours, that life was simple, that life was good. But for Sofia Reyes, life had not been simple for a very long time. She was 20 years old, though she carried herself like someone who had already lived 2 lifetimes. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat bun at the back of her neck. Her uniform, a simple gray blouse and dark trousers, was pressed and clean, because Sofia always kept herself neat even when everything around her was falling apart. That was the kind of woman she was. Quiet. Careful. Disciplined. A woman who had learned early that the world did not pause to wait for you to catch your breath. She stood near the large blue and white beach umbrella that had been set up at the edge of the VIP section of the park, an area roped off with white cord, reserved for the man she worked for. She was not here for rest. She was not here to enjoy the warm sand beneath her feet or the sparkle of sunlight on the water. She was here because Don Rafael Vega, her employer, had decided to spend the afternoon at the beach, and wherever Don Vega went, his staff was expected to follow. Sofia's hands were busy folding a stack of fresh white towels, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency, her eyes darting every few seconds, not to the horizon, not to the beautiful sea, but to the small blanket spread on the sand just 5 feet behind her. There, sitting on a pale yellow blanket decorated with little ducks, was the reason Sofia Reyes had not broken completely. Her daughter. Lily. 2 years old. Tiny as a wish. Bright as a candle flame in an otherwise dark room. Lily was the kind of child who made strangers stop and smile without knowing why. She had Sofia's dark eyes, wide and curious and deep as wells, and her late father's round cheeks, cheeks so soft and warm that kissing them felt like pressing your lips to fresh bread. She was wearing a little white sundress with yellow embroidery along the collar, and her feet were bare, her tiny toes digging happily into the cool sand as she pressed a small plastic spade into the ground with serious concentration. "Careful, mi amor," Sofia murmured softly, glancing over her shoulder at her daughter. Lily looked up. Her whole face became a smile. Not a polite smile, not a practiced smile, the complete, unguarded, full-body smile of a 2-year-old who sees her mother and feels that all is right with the world. Her little arms lifted towards Sofia automatically, instinctively, because at 2 years old you have not yet learned to hide how much you love someone. Sofia's heart did what it always did when Lily smiled at her. It cracked open, not from pain, but from something that felt too large to be contained inside a human chest. Love, in its most raw and devastating form. "Just a moment, baby," she whispered. "Just let Mama finish this." She turned back to the towels. This was the rhythm of Sofia's life. Finish this. Wait 1 moment. Just a little longer. She had been saying those words to herself since the day she discovered she was pregnant at 17, alone in a bathroom with a test strip in her trembling hand and the sound of her own heartbeat very loud in her ears. Her boyfriend, Lily's father, had left before Lily was even born. Her own parents had their own struggles, their own poverty, their own weight. There was no one to catch Sofia when the ground disappeared beneath her feet. So Sofia had learned to fall and catch herself. She had found work through a network of housekeeping agencies. Cleaning offices, cleaning apartments, cleaning the homes of people who barely noticed she existed. Then, 8 months ago, the agency had placed her in the household of Don Rafael Vega. The pay was 3 times what she had been earning before. The mansion was enormous. The rules were strict. The man himself was rarely seen, a shadow in fine clothing who moved through his own house like a ghost that had not yet decided to haunt anything in particular. She had heard the whispers, of course. Everyone had. Rafael Vega. 30 years old. Born into wealth and violence. The kind of man whose name was spoken in certain circles with a particular combination of respect and terror. The kind of man who, it was said, had never once, in all his years of ruthless accumulation of power, been seen to smile. Sophia did not know if the stories were true. She did not ask. She kept her head down, her work done, her daughter fed and clean and loved with every ounce of energy she had left at the end of each long day. Lily was everything. Without Lily, there was no sunrise worth waking for. Without Lily, Sophia would have disappeared into the gray machinery of poverty and exhaustion long ago. But every night, when she lay in the small servant's room at the back of the mansion and felt her sleeping daughter's warm weight against her chest, something inside her steadied. She could do this. She would do this. For Lily. She finished folding the last towel and placed it neatly on the cart beside her. She turned around. The yellow blanket was empty. For one full breath, one single, terrible breath, Sophia simply stared at the empty blanket. The yellow fabric with the little ducks. The plastic spade lying on its side in the sand. A small indentation where Lily's tiny body had been sitting just 30 seconds ago, maybe 40, maybe less. The sand still held the shape of her. Sophia's brain refused, for that one breath, to understand what it was seeing. It offered alternatives instead. Lily moved to the left. Lily is behind the umbrella. Lily is behind the cart. Lily is. Then Sophia looked at the water. And the world ended. She saw Lily at the edge of the shoreline, no, past the edge, already in the shallow water, already knee-deep for an adult, which meant waist-deep for a tiny 2-year-old girl, and even as Sophia's eyes found her daughter, a wave came. Not a large wave by any objective measure. Not the kind of wave that would trouble a 10-year-old or a teenager or any adult standing there. Just a rolling, casual, indifferent wave, the kind the ocean produces thousands of times per hour without thought or malice or any awareness at all of what it is about to destroy. It hit Lily at the chest. And Lily disappeared. The sound that came out of Sophia's body was not a scream. It was something older than screaming. Something from beneath language, beneath thought, from whatever part of a mother's nervous system is wired directly to her child without the involvement of the mind at all. It was raw and it was animal and it split the warm afternoon air like a blade. She was already running. Her feet threw up sprays of sand. She knocked into the cart and sent towels flying, but she did not feel it. She did not feel anything except the iron spike of terror driving straight through the center of her chest as she ran toward the water, toward the place where her daughter had been, where the wave had swallowed her, where the ocean was now moving and churning and showing nothing but foam and blue-green water and Lily. She hit the water. Cold. The shock of cold water at her ankles, her shins, her knees as she pushed through it, her hands sweeping through the foam desperately, her eyes scanning with a desperation so complete it was almost calm, the strange, horrible calm of absolute terror, when the body stops processing anything except the one thing it needs. Lily. Lily, baby. People on the beach had heard the scream. Heads turned. A woman with sunglasses pushed them up onto her head and stood. 2 teenagers looked at each other. A man with a cooler started walking forward but slowly, uncertain, the way bystanders always move when they are not sure the emergency is real. But Sophia was not uncertain. Sophia was already thigh-deep in the water, her uniform soaked and clinging to her legs, her hands plunging beneath the surface again and again, fingers spread wide, searching. The current pulled at her ankles. The sand shifted beneath her feet. A second wave hit her at the hip and staggered her sideways. "Please," she was sobbing now, the word coming out between gasps. "Please, please, please." She could not swim. She had never learned. This fact sat in her chest now like a stone, the horrifying knowledge that she was already in water past her ability, that each step deeper was a step toward her own drowning, and that she could not stop taking those steps because her daughter was somewhere in front of her in that dark moving water. And then her foot hit something soft. She plunged her hand down and grabbed and pulled, and it was a clump of seaweed, and the sob that came out of her was the most broken sound she had ever made in her life. "Someone help her." A woman on the shore was screaming now. "There's a baby in the water. Someone help." More people standing. More people watching. The teenagers had their phones out. The man with the cooler had stopped walking. The collective paralysis of a crowd in crisis, everyone waiting for someone else to move first, everyone calculating risk and responsibility and distance, the beautiful terrible mathematics of bystander in action. Sophia turned toward the shore in that moment, not to give up, never to give up, but because a wave had pushed her backward and she needed to find her footing, and in turning she saw the VIP section through her tears, and she saw the umbrella, and she saw the man standing beneath it. He had been watching the water. Rafael Vega. He stood very still in a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, dark trousers, expensive shoes that were going to be ruined by sand. He was holding nothing. His face, that face she had seen perhaps a dozen times in 8 months, always composed, always unreadable, always carrying the particular blankness of a man who has trained himself not to feel things in public, was turned toward the water. Toward where Lily had gone under. His eyes met Sophia's across the distance. And something shifted in his expression. Not much. But enough. Sophia did not think. She did not calculate. She did not weigh power or fear or the fact that this man terrified his own bodyguards, that grown men lowered their voices when they spoke his name, that she was a maid, a nobody, a woman who mopped his floors and had no right to speak to him directly. She sank to her knees in the shallow water. The sand soaked through her trousers. The waves pushed at her and she let them because she was already past caring about anything, except the 2-year-old girl who was somewhere beneath that water. She raised her hands toward him. Her voice came out broken and whole at the same time, the way only a mother's voice can be when she is past everything except love. "My toddler is drowning, please, please save her, please." Rafael Vega had been many things in his 30 years of life. He had been a quiet, serious boy in a house that smelled of cigarette smoke and danger, learning very early that emotions were liabilities, that softness invited pain, that the world respected only 2 things, power and the willingness to use it. He had been a young man who entered his father's business with open eyes and a closed heart, who learned the language of threats and negotiations and the particular silence that falls over a room when a dangerous man enters it. He had been, for the last 8 years, the head of that business, a man whose decisions affected hundreds of people, whose name opened doors and closed mouths, whose presence at a table changed the temperature of whatever room he was in. He had been called ruthless. Cold. Merciless. A man with stone where his heart should be. He had never once, in all those years, disputed any of it. He stood at the edge of the VIP section that afternoon with the specific stillness of a man who is always watching, always calculating, always 3 moves ahead of whatever is about to happen. He had not wanted to come to the beach today. The beach was not his environment, too open, too public, too full of the noise of other people's happiness. But his lawyer had requested the meeting here, and Raphael did not make choices based on personal preference. He made them based on efficiency. The meeting had concluded 30 minutes ago. He should have left already. He had not left because there was something he could not look away from. The maid's daughter. He had noticed the child 40 minutes earlier, not because he had been looking, but because it was impossible not to look. The little girl in the white sundress sitting on her yellow blanket, attacking the sand with her small spade with an expression of profound concentration, as though the digging were the most important work in the world. He had watched her for 30 seconds, maybe 40. Something about her complete seriousness, the furrowed brow, the determined little hands, the absolute commitment to whatever 2-year-old goal she was pursuing, had made something move, briefly, in the vicinity of his chest. He had looked away. He had looked back at his phone, at the messages that required responses, at the business of being Rafael Vega which never paused, never breathed, never gave him a moment that was fully his own. Then he had heard the scream. Not the words at first. Just the sound. The raw, animal, maternal sound that had cut through the afternoon noise like a signal flare, bypassing his ears entirely and going straight to something much deeper. He had looked up. He had seen the maid, Sophia, he thought her name was, Sophia Reyes, running toward the water. He had seen the wave. He had understood, in an instant, with the cold clarity that was perhaps his most dangerous quality, exactly what had happened and exactly what it meant. He had stood still. For 2 seconds, 3, 4, he had stood completely still. This was not callousness, though it looked like it from the outside. This was Raphael's mind doing what it always did, assessing. Where was the child? How far out? What was the current doing? Who else was moving? Was there a lifeguard? His eyes swept the shoreline in one rapid movement and found, no lifeguard in this section, the bystanders moving too slowly, the maid already in the water but struggling, unable to swim, about to become a second crisis. Then Sophia had turned and looked at him. And she had gone to her knees in the water. And she had raised her hands. And she had said those words. Please save her. 3 words. The word please. The word save. The word her. And something in the way she said them, not begging in the way that people begged him for things, which was always tinged with fear and self-interest, but begging in a way that had no self in it at all. She was not afraid of him in that moment. She was not calculating how to approach him. She had simply run out of every resource she possessed except the raw willingness to ask. He was already moving before she finished the sentence. Later, he would not be able to fully explain the movement. It was not a decision, exactly, not the way decisions usually worked for him, deliberate, considered, strategic. It was more like the cessation of hesitation. Like something that had been held had been released. He ran. The expensive shoes hit the sand, then the water. The cold shocked up through his legs. He did not slow down. He had always been a strong swimmer, one of the few physical skills his father had insisted on. A man must know water, he had said, for reasons Raphael never fully understood. The cold water rose to his thighs, his waist. He pushed through the resistance of it. His eyes swept the surface, there, a flash of white fabric tumbling in the water 12 feet ahead of him and to the left. He dove. The world became cold and green and muffled. His hands reached forward through the blur of sand-churned water. He could feel the current pulling sideways, the push of a dying wave overhead. His fingers touched something, cloth, he grabbed. He had her. He felt the weight of her, so small, so impossibly small, and he pulled her toward him and pushed upward with everything he had. He broke the surface gasping. Lily was in his arms. She was limp. Her eyes were closed. Her white sundress was plastered to her tiny body and her mouth was slightly open and she was not moving, not coughing, not crying, not making any sound at all. Behind him, from the shore, came a sound so broken it didn't seem like it could have come from a human throat. It came from Sophia. Raphael moved through the water toward shore with Lily pressed against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her small head, the other arm wrapped beneath her body, holding her the way he had seen people hold infants, not from experience, not from practice, but from some deep instinct that apparently survived even in men who had spent years convincing themselves they no longer had instincts of that kind. The water resisted him. The current tried to pull him sideways. He did not let it. His feet found the sandy bottom and he was walking, then he was out of the water and onto the wet sand of the shoreline and people were everywhere suddenly, the crowd that had been frozen in bystander paralysis now surging forward as the emergency resolved itself into something they could witness rather than intervene in. He barely registered them. Sophia reached him before he had taken 3 steps out of the water. She had been waiting at the shoreline, she had waded out to meet him, ankle deep, knee deep, reaching for her daughter even before Raphael had fully cleared the water. Her hands were already extended, shaking visibly, her face a devastation of terror and desperate hope. Raphael knelt in the wet sand. He laid Lily down carefully, very carefully, on the flat hard sand of the waterline. The little girl did not move. Her lips had a faint bluish tinge. Her chest was not rising. "She's not," Sophia's voice was gone. The words came out as breath. "She's not breathing." "Move," Raphael said. Not unkindly. Just clearly. He positioned his hands, 2 fingers, the way he had once, years ago in a different life, been trained to, over Lily's tiny sternum. The sternum of a 2-year-old is barely larger than a playing card. Her whole chest was smaller than both his hands placed side by side. He had to be careful. He had to be precise. He tilted her head back gently, checked her airway. Brought his face down. "What are you?" Sophia started. "Trust me," he said. He did not know why he said it. It was not a thing he said. He was not a man who asked for trust, he took it, or did without it. But he said it to Sophia in that moment, and something in his voice must have carried a weight she recognized, because she went quiet. 2 small rescue breaths. He felt Lily's chest rise, faintly, with each one. Then compressions. Gentle. Measured. 2 fingers, careful pressure, watching the chest, counting silently. The beach had gone almost completely silent. The laughing had stopped. The children had been pulled back by instinctive parental arms. Even the seagulls seemed to pause. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sophia was on her knees in the sand beside her daughter, her hands pressed flat against the ground like she was trying to hold the earth itself in place. She was not making any sound anymore. She had passed beyond the sound of grief into the place where only watching exists. 10, 11, 12. "Come on," Raphael said quietly. Not to anyone in particular. Not to Sophia. To Lily. To the situation. To whatever governed these things. "Come on." His voice had changed. Not softened, exactly, it had never been a soft voice, and that did not change now. But something in it had opened. Some register that was not authority or command or the cold business-like tone that ran all his conversations. Something older. Something he did not know he still possessed. 18, 19, 20. He stopped. Bent down. 2 more rescue breaths. He straightened. Began again. Sophia had started crying without sound. Tears running freely down her face, dripping from her jaw onto the sand. 1, 2, 3. Lily coughed. It was small. Barely perceptible. A tiny, convulsive clenching of her little body. Then a second cough, stronger. Then a sound, half cough, half gag, and water, a small thin stream of it, coming from her mouth as she rolled slightly to the side in Raphael's careful hands. Sophia made a sound that was not a word. Lily's chest rose on its own. Then fell. Then rose again. Her eyes opened, not fully, not clearly, they were half-lidded and unfocused, the eyes of a child still too deep in shock to properly see. But they opened. Her lips moved. Mama. The word was barely sound. Barely breath. Just the shape of it, really, the shape of the only word that mattered. But it carried to every person standing on that beach. It carried in the silence the way a single note carries in an empty cathedral, filling every corner, touching every surface, arriving in every chest. Something happened to the crowd at that word. Something collective and unplanned. People who did not know each other, who had been strangers that morning and would be strangers again by evening, reached for each other's arms without thinking about it. A man in a baseball cap pressed his fist against his mouth. Two women who had been standing 5 feet apart and had not spoken all afternoon leaned together. Sophia collapsed forward. She gathered Lily into her arms, gently, so gently, with the particular infinite gentleness of a mother handling the thing she almost lost, and she pressed her daughter against her chest and she held her and she sobbed. Not the panicked sobbing of the emergency. This was different. This was the sobbing that comes after, when the danger has passed and the body finally lets itself acknowledge how close it came. Lily, she whispered into her daughter's hair. Lily, Lily, Lily. The little girl was still coughing, still dazed, but her fingers had found Sophia's collar and were gripping it with the instinctive ferocity of the very young, and she was making small sounds, not quite words, not quite crying, just the sound of a child who knows her mother is there. Raphael sat back on his heels in the wet sand. His white shirt was soaked through, translucent against his skin. His expensive shoes were ruined. His hair was dripping. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He looked at them for a long moment, these hands that had signed orders and made threats and broken things, and could not, quite, recognize them. The paramedics arrived 11 minutes later. In those 11 minutes, Raphael did not leave. This was, in itself, remarkable. He was a man with places to be, always, a man whose time was parceled into 15-minute increments of meetings and decisions and the management of a world that required his constant attention. He had bodyguards who were already at his elbow, murmuring in low voices about the crowd, about exposure, about the fact that photographs were being taken and that his presence at this incident was going to create complications. He waved them off. He sat in the sand. Not near Sophia and Lily, not close enough to intrude on something that private, something that belonged entirely to the two of them. But near enough to be present. He sat with his arms resting on his knees, his soaked shirt drying in the afternoon sun, watching the water. Or appearing to watch the water. In truth, he was watching nothing. He was somewhere else entirely, in a place inside himself that he had not visited in so long he had almost convinced himself it no longer existed. He was 7 years old. He was in his father's kitchen, and something had gone very wrong in the house that night. He could not remember now what it was, only the feeling of it, the way the air had been charged with adult violence and the particular fear of a child who does not understand the danger but senses it in every nerve. He had been alone in the kitchen and he had been very afraid and there had been no one at all, to come. He had learned, that night, to stop needing anyone to come. He had built the wall over the course of years after that, not quickly, not dramatically, but one stone at a time, the way real walls are built, until the structure was so complete and so integrated into who he was that he had forgotten, eventually, that it was a wall at all. He thought of it as his personality. His nature. The thing that made him good at what he did. Stone does not grieve. Stone does not fear. Stone does not reach for other people in the dark. Stone does not shake, he thought, looking at his hands again. Behind him, he could hear Sophia talking to Lily in soft, continuous murmurs, Spanish and English mixed together the way bilingual mothers speak to their children, the language of absolute love which has no use for consistency or grammar. My heart, my life, my little moon, my everything, breathe baby, breathe, Mama has you, Mama is here. Raphael closed his eyes. Something was happening inside his chest that he did not have vocabulary for. It was not sentimentality. He was certain of that. He had always been contemptuous of sentimentality, the cheap emotional transactions of people who hadn't done the work of actually controlling their inner lives. This was not that. It was more like recognition. He recognized something in Sophia's voice. In the complete abandonment of self it contained. In the way she had knelt in the water and raised her hands to him, not performing distress, not calculating its effect, not angling for anything except the single thing she needed. He had never, in all his years of dealings with human beings, encountered a need that pure. Everything in Raphael's world was transactional. Everything. Even the few human connections he permitted himself operated on the logic of exchange. I provide this, you provide that, the balance is maintained. Love, in his experience, was another form of leverage. Care was another word for vulnerability, and vulnerability was another word for target. But Sophia, in that moment by the water, had not been performing anything. She had simply been a mother. And he had simply been the nearest person who could swim. No, said something honest in him. That's not all it was. He could have sent one of his men. He had 2 bodyguards who were both stronger swimmers than he was. He could have pointed and said go and stayed where he was, dry and composed and uninvolved. He had not done that. He had run. He was still trying to understand why. Mr. Vega. Her voice was soft. Careful. Still slightly broken around the edges, the way a voice sounds after it has been used for screaming and crying. He turned. Sophia was standing behind him, Lily wrapped in a large dry towel and pressed against her shoulder, the little girl's eyes now fully open and tracking her surroundings with the wide, dazed attention of a child who has been through something she doesn't have words for yet. Sophia's own hair had come loose from its bun. Her uniform was soaked and ruined. There were sand marks on her knees from where she had knelt, and salt tracks on her face from dried tears. She looked young. He was aware of it suddenly in a way he hadn't been before. 20 years old, barely out of childhood herself, really, standing on a beach with her wet baby on her shoulder and her whole life in her arms. She opened her mouth. He was certain she was going to say thank you. He had heard thank you in 1,000 different registers, grateful, performative, calculating, exhausted, resentful. He already knew what expression to arrange his face into for it. Instead, she said, I didn't know you could do that. He blinked. CPR, she clarified. And then, to his absolute astonishment, through the tears still shining in her eyes, through the wreckage of the afternoon, her mouth moved into something that was almost, not quite, but almost, a small and wondering smile. You saved my daughter's life. She said it simply. Not as an accusation. Not as a performance of gratitude. Just as a fact, stated plainly, the way she might say the sky is blue or the water is cold. A fact that she was still, clearly, in the process of understanding. As was he. The paramedics checked Lily thoroughly. Raphael watched from a distance as the two EMTs crouched in the sand beside Sophia, moving their instruments and their gentle hands over the small girl with professional care. Lily, for her part, had recovered with the breathtaking resilience of the very young. She was sitting up now in Sophia's arms, still wrapped in the towel, still slightly pale, but looking around at the gathered EMTs and the small crowd with an expression that had shifted from dazed confusion to something approaching alert curiosity. Children, Raphael thought. They come back so fast. They don't know yet to stay broken. One of his bodyguards, a large, quiet man named Marco who had worked for him for 6 years, approached and crouched beside him in the sand. There are photographers, Marco said. His voice was neutral. Professional. At least 3. Phones. Could be more. Let them photograph, Raphael said. Marco paused. Sir. Let them. Another pause, shorter. Understood. He stood and walked away to manage whatever needed managing, and Raphael returned to watching Lily, who had now reached up and grabbed one of the paramedic's stethoscopes with a small decisive hand and was examining it with the focused interest of someone conducting an important inspection. Something moved in Raphael's chest again. That same unidentifiable movement. He became aware, slowly, of something else. The crowd had not dispersed. They had rearranged, spread out along the edge of the VIP rope, giving space but remaining present, with the collective instinct of people who feel they have witnessed something that should not be walked away from too quickly. He saw, in their faces, something he rarely saw directed at himself, not fear, not calculation, not the careful neutrality of people managing their proximity to danger. Something warmer than any of that. He did not know what to do with it, so he looked back at the water. The Gulf of Mexico continued doing what it had been doing before any of this happened, rolling in and rolling out, indifferent and eternal and beautiful in its indifference. The afternoon light was shifting now, the sun beginning its long slow descent toward the horizon, turning the water from blue to something richer and more complex, the color of old copper and new fire. She wants to show you something. Raphael turned again. Sophia was standing closer now. She had approached quietly while he was watching the water, and she was holding Lily facing outward on her hip, the little girl's legs wrapped around her mother's waist. Lily was looking directly at Raphael with the absolute, unblinking attention that 2-year-olds give to things they find significant. In her small hand, she was holding a piece of sea glass. Green, frosted, smoothed to softness by years of rolling in the ocean. She had apparently found it somewhere in the sand in the last few minutes, a piece of discarded glass that the sea had taken and returned, transformed. Lily extended her arm toward him. The piece of sea glass sat in the center of her tiny palm. For offering. Raphael looked at it. Then at Lily. Then at the sea glass again. Go on, Sophia said quietly. There was something in her voice, not instruction, not command, but invitation. You are allowed to take this. He reached out. His fingers, large and calloused and responsible for so many things he was not proud of, closed carefully around the piece of sea glass. Lily watched his hand take it with an expression of profound satisfaction, as though she had just completed a very important transaction. Then she turned her face into her mother's neck and began, without any apparent reason, to hum. Raphael held the piece of sea glass in his palm. It was warm from Lily's hand. She does that, Sophia said softly. She collects things and gives them away. She gave a pebble to the mailman last week. He looked like he might cry. I understand, Raphael said, before he could decide whether to say it. Sophia looked at him. He looked at the sea glass. I owe you an explanation, Raphael said. The words came out unfamiliar in his mouth, like speaking in a language he had once known and mostly forgotten. "You don't owe me anything," Sophia said. "You saved my daughter's life. I owe you everything." "That's not what I mean." He paused. Gathered himself, or whatever version of himself was present here, in the wet sand, holding a piece of sea glass, still faintly shaking in the hands. "I mean, an explanation of myself. Of why he stopped. "You don't have to explain anything. I know." He turned the sea glass over in his fingers. "I want to." It was perhaps the most surprising sentence he had spoken in 10 years. Sophia waited. She was good at waiting, he realized, the particular patience of someone who has learned that rushing toward things often makes them flee. She stood in the gold-shifting afternoon light with her daughter humming against her neck, and she waited, and she did not fill the silence with noise, which was rarer than people understood. "I was told, when I was young," Raphael said slowly, "that caring about things makes you weak. That the more you love, the more you can be threatened through that love. That a man in my position could not afford it." He looked at the water. "I believed it for a long time. I built my entire life around that belief." He turned the sea glass over once more. "Then today," he said, "a 2-year-old girl in a white dress handed me a piece of garbage the ocean had polished." Sophia made a sound, small, involuntary. Between a laugh and a sob. "And I don't know what to do with that," Raphael admitted. It was the most honest thing he had said to another human being in years. The sun was sitting low and heavy over the gulf when the ambulance finally departed, not as an emergency, not with lights and sirens, but as a precaution, carrying Sophia and Lily to the nearest hospital for a full evaluation that both the paramedics and Raphael, without quite making it a request, had insisted upon. He had arranged a private room. He had done it through Marco, quietly, without announcement, and he had told Marco to tell no one who arranged it, only that it was arranged. Old habits. Avoid obligation. Avoid the appearance of caring. Keep transactions clean. But he found himself, an hour later, in the parking lot of the hospital. He sat in his car for 7 minutes. Then he went inside. Sophia was in a small room on the 2nd floor, in a rocking chair beside the hospital bed where Lily lay sleeping, truly sleeping now, peacefully, her color restored, her breathing even and deep, one small fist tucked under her chin in the way that very small children sleep, with their whole bodies expressing the total surrender to rest. The room was quiet. The machines showed good numbers. A nurse had been and gone. The light was the soft, beige yellow of hospital evenings. Sophia looked up when he appeared in the doorway. She did not look surprised. She looked, he thought, like someone who had been through something enormous and had come out the other side and was now sitting very still in the middle of the person she had become because of it. He entered quietly. Pulled the chair from the corner of the room to where she was sitting. Sat down. For a while, neither of them said anything. They looked at Lily sleeping. The little girl's hand had relaxed in sleep, and lying half open on the pillow beside her face was something small and green. The piece of sea glass. Someone, Sophia, or perhaps the paramedics, or perhaps no one at all, and it had simply traveled by some small miracle, had brought it here. It lay beside Lily's sleeping face like a talisman. Like proof. "She'll remember none of this," Sophia said finally. "No," Raphael agreed. "Children that age, it doesn't stay. She'll wake up tomorrow and want crackers and she'll want to watch cartoons and she won't know." Sophia's voice was even, almost calm, the calm of complete exhaustion. "But I'll remember it forever. Every single second of it." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "Why are you here?" she asked. Not accusingly. Genuinely curious, the way she had been curious about the CPR, a fact she was trying to understand. He thought about giving the answer that would have made sense 6 hours ago. I had business in the area. I wanted to confirm the staff member was recovered. I needed to evaluate liability. I don't know, he said instead. I wanted to see that she was all right. Sophia was quiet for a moment. She is, she said. Because of you. You would have found another way. I couldn't swim, she said flatly. There was no other way. Without you, she would have, she stopped. Pressed her lips together. Looked at Lily. Without you, I would not have a reason to breathe tomorrow morning. The words landed on him like something physical. He had been thanked before. He had been thanked extensively, elaborately, with gifts and gestures and performances of gratitude. He had been thanked by people who feared him and people who needed him and people who wanted something from him. This was different. This was a 20-year-old woman in a ruined uniform sitting in a hospital chair at the end of the worst day of her life, saying something simply and entirely true, with no angle and no calculation and no desire for anything except the truth of it. And it undid something in him. Not dramatically. Not with the sudden crash of a wall falling. More like, the slow releasing of a long-held breath. The kind of breath you don't know you've been holding until you finally let it go and feel, for the first time in years, the lungs fully expand. I have been, Raphael said carefully, for a long time, a man who believed that nothing was worth more than what it cost you. That love was always more liability than asset. That the safest position was the one with the least attachment. He paused. I want you to know that today has made me reconsider several things. Sophia looked at him for a long time. Then she said, she gave you the sea glass. Yes. She's never given sea glass to anyone before. Sophia's eyes were bright. She gives pebbles. She gives dandelions. She gave a bottle cap to the gardener. But she's been carrying that piece of sea glass for 2 days. She found it in the garden and she wouldn't put it down. She looked at her sleeping daughter. I think she knew. 2-year-olds don't know. You'd be surprised, Sophia said quietly, what the very young know. He looked at the sea glass on the pillow. At Lily's sleeping face beside it. At the small, even rise and fall of her tiny chest. And something happened in the vicinity of his heart that he had no defenses against, because he had never thought to build defenses there. He had fortified himself against threats and negotiations and the darkness of the world he moved through. He had not thought to fortify himself against a sleeping 2-year-old and the piece of sea glass she had given him. He sat in the quiet hospital room for a long time. He did not leave. Sophia did not ask him to leave. Lily slept on, unaware, completely, peacefully unaware, that the small act of opening her tiny hand on a warm afternoon at Isla Blanca Park had opened something far larger. That the wave which had taken her had, in returning her, changed the geography of 3 lives entirely. Outside the hospital window, the Gulf of Mexico continued its ancient work, rolling in and rolling out, taking things and giving them back changed, the way the sea has always done and will always do, wearing all hard edges soft, turning all discarded things to treasure, returning to the shore what the shore most needs. Rafael Vega sat in a hospital chair with a piece of sea glass in his pocket and felt, for the first time in 23 years, the specific and terrifying warmth of being, despite every precaution and every carefully constructed wall, completely and irreversibly human. And somewhere in the soft dark of her healing sleep, Lily hummed.